There's one rein to each horse, and it goes straight through from here to the outside of each horse.
When we would go carriage driving, well, first of all, he'd take me on a different route every day, and I do not know how he managed to do that.
What if the quietest granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth, the one nobody was watching, quietly became one of the biggest winners of the royal inheritance, not through power, not through headlines, but through something far more dangerous inside the monarchy: trust. And while the entire world was distracted by Prince Harry's exile, media scandals, and Prince William preparing for the throne, something far more strategic was happening behind closed palace doors, something almost invisible unless you know exactly where to look. Because this is not the story of the loudest royal, this is the story of the one who stayed silent and still won. Lady Louise Windsor, a young woman who once worked at a simple garden center, lived far from controversy, and somehow built one of the closest emotional bonds with Queen Elizabeth herself, a bond that insiders say shaped decisions made in the Queen's final years, decisions that may have quietly shifted the balance of influence inside the royal family. And what makes this even more shocking is that almost nobody noticed it happening in real time, because before we talk about inheritance, money, or royal assets, we need to understand the one currency that truly matters inside Buckingham Palace, and that is personal trust. Because in a family where titles can be given, removed, or reshaped overnight, the real power lies in who the monarch feels closest to when the cameras are gone. And that is exactly where Lady Louise's story begins, not with privilege, but with vulnerability. Because from the very moment she was born, her life was surrounded by tension and uncertainty. On November 8, 2003, her mother Sophie was rushed into emergency care due to a sudden and life-threatening placental abruption. Her father, Prince Edward, was not even present, and what should have been a royal celebration turned into a race against time. Louise was delivered through an emergency cesarean section. Both mother and baby suffered serious blood loss, and for a moment, the situation was critical. And in that moment, something changed forever, because Queen Elizabeth was not watching as a monarch, she was watching as a grandmother, and that emotional shift created a protective instinct that would quietly define their relationship for years to come. And Louise's challenges did not end there. As she grew up, she faced a condition called esotropia, requiring multiple surgeries and constant care. And while other royal children were growing up in the spotlight, Louise was growing up under something much more powerful: private attention from the Queen herself, away from cameras, away from pressure, building a connection that insiders later described as one of the closest she had with any grandchild. And what made Louise different was not just her circumstances, but her nature. She was calm, artistic, grounded, never chasing attention, never involved in royal drama, and in a family often surrounded by noise, that silence became her greatest strength, because at Balmoral, far from public eyes, the Queen found comfort in her presence. Simple moments, drawing together, walking, spending time without any expectations, and those moments built something deeper than protocol. They built loyalty, and that loyalty was quietly rewarded in ways that would only become clear years later. And then came Prince Philip, a man known for his discipline, strength, and no-nonsense personality, who rarely showed open favoritism. Yet with Louise, something was different, because after arthritis forced him to leave polo, he found a new passion in carriage driving, not as a casual hobby, but as a serious competitive sport, representing Britain internationally even into his later years. And instead of keeping that world to himself, he chose Louise, personally training her, spending hours with her in Windsor Great Park, teaching her not just the skill, but the mindset behind it. And over time, Louise didn't just learn, she excelled. She competed, and Philip watched with visible pride. And when he passed away in 2021, the decision he made spoke louder than any royal announcement, because he did not pass his most personal possessions to the future king or the next in line. He passed them to Louise, his carriage, carriage, his ponies, everything connected to that part of his life. And that was not just inheritance, that was identity being handed over, a legacy placed in the hands of someone he truly trusted to carry it forward. And that moment alone should have made people pay attention, but most were still focused elsewhere, and that is exactly why the next part of the story went almost unnoticed, because while the public often assumes that the royal family shares one massive pool of wealth, the reality is far more complex, with a strict separation between the crown estate, which belongs to the institution of the monarchy, and personal assets, which Queen Elizabeth controlled entirely, including private estates like Balmoral and Sandringham, valuable jewelry collections, investments, and personal possessions worth hundreds of millions. And here is the detail that changes everything. The Queen had complete authority to decide who would receive specific items from her personal wealth, and according to multiple reports, she made those decisions carefully in her final years, focusing not on hierarchy, but on personal connection. And that is where things reportedly became tense, because a significant portion of her personal jewelry was directed towards Catherine, Princess of Wales, reinforcing her role in the monarchy's future, a decision that insiders suggest did not sit well with Queen Camilla's side of the family, because it revealed something deeper. The Queen was not distributing her legacy equally, she was rewarding those she felt closest to, those she trusted, and in that quiet pattern of decisions, Lady Louise's position becomes impossible to ignore, because she was not just another grandchild, she was part of the one branch of the family that caused the Queen the least stress. Prince Edward and Sophie built a stable, drama-free household, and Sophie in particular was often described as one of the Queen's most trusted and dependable figures, someone who showed loyalty without seeking attention, and that environment shaped Louise into someone very different from the typical image of a royal. She worked a normal job at a garden center, she avoided entitlement, she lived with a sense of responsibility rather than privilege, and that authenticity stood out in a family often defined by status. And over time, that combination of humility, loyalty, and quiet presence positioned her in a place few people expected, not at the center of attention, but at the center of trust. And as she moved forward with her life, studying at St. Andrews, the same university where Prince William met Kate, and later joining military training as part of the Army Reserve, her path began to reflect something familiar, something that echoed the early life of Queen Elizabeth herself: discipline, service, and a deep understanding of duty. And this is where the story shifts from past to future, because the real question is no longer what Lady Louise has already received, but what she represents moving forward. In a monarchy that is evolving, shrinking, and facing constant public pressure, figures like Louise, stable, trusted, and grounded, may become far more important than those who dominate headlines. And in a system where influence is often built quietly over time, the person who does not chase power is sometimes the one who ends up closest to it. And if you look closely at the Queen's final years, at the decisions she made, the people she trusted, and the legacy she shaped, you start to see a pattern. And at the center of that pattern is a name most people never expected to matter this much: Lady Louise Windsor, the royal nobody watched until now.